Hello, AFN, and greetings from Washington, D.C. I want to begin by just saying I really wish I could be with all of you. AFN is certainly one of the highlights of my year, my and Julie's year. So I've never missed an AFN as your U.S. Senator. Unfortunately, you're probably seeing, I'm sure you're seeing, all the very dramatic world events that are happening right now. So I am going to be heading out to the Middle East with a bipartisan group of senators going to show our solidarity and support for our most important ally in the Middle East, and that's the state of Israel and the people of Israel. But we'll also be going to Egypt and Saudi Arabia to look at ways in which we can try to make sure that the conflict there does not broaden into a broader conflict. And also looking for opportunities for humanitarian assistance for the people in Gaza, who are also the civilians who are suffering, while backing Israel's ability to defeat the terrorist group Hamas. As you all know, I talk a lot about how it's becoming a dangerous world, the new era of authoritarian aggression with dictators in Beijing, China, in Moscow, in Tehran, the Iranian terrorists, dictators. And we know as Alaskans, in many ways, we are on the front lines. We saw that joint Chinese-Russian patrol near our shores this past summer. Alaska Natives have been great patriots and veterans defending our country for generations. I thank you for that, but that's unfortunately why I'm not going to be with all of you. I would love to, but when I gave Julie Kitka, by the way, who's doing a great job as president of AFN, a call and said, "Hey, Julie, I'm not going to be able to make it," and I told her why. She said, and I quote, "Senator, don't worry. I don't think you're going to be missed as long as your wife Julie is here." She literally said that. So Julie is there. Hello, Julie. I miss you. And so you'll be in great hands with my amazing wife. So I want to give a DC update for all of you. I first want to talk about some of the travels that I've been doing in rural Alaska. A recent trip to Bethel, of course, was under very tragic circumstances with our Congresswoman Mary Peltola and the loss of her beloved husband, Buzzy. Julie and I traveled to the services there in Bethel. The community and outreach was really powerful, but I would ask you to continue to keep Congresswoman Peltola in your prayers and her family. It's just an unbelievable, tragic situation that Mary's going through right now. This August, I was able to see with Julie a number of you. We had the Secretary of Transportation. We hosted him with all of you in Kotzebue. We were in Kayana, Shuganuk, Kobuk, Huslia, Hughes, and Allakaket, where in Allakaket, my wife Julie had an amazing homecoming because her great-grandmother, Josephine Udadalna Evans, is actually originally from that community. Now, she is a legend in that community. During a time of great famine, she actually walked by herself over 100 miles from Allakaket to Rampart when she was just 13 years old. Think about how tough that was, a trek by herself in the winter. What a brave, tough woman. My wife obviously got those genes, but it was so wonderful because so many of the elders and the community of Allakaket came out to greet Julie like a long-lost daughter and a homecoming. It was a really, really special day that we will remember the rest of our lives. And, like I said, that grit and determination from Julie's great-grandmother, Udadalna, Certainly reminds me of the women in my family, my mother-in-law, my wife, my daughters, but it reminds me of so many of our strong Alaska Native women across the state. So, and it just also reminds me those kind of travels of, we all live in different parts of the state, come from different areas, different backgrounds, but there are really strong ties that bind all of us. And that was a really good example of that when we had the opportunity to travel in rural Alaska for a good part of August. So let me go to some of the big issues. And the number one issue that I know all of you are focused on, probably is your number one issue, is salmon and subsistence and the way of life that's so important from a food security, cultural perspective, heritage perspective. And unfortunately, we have seen shocking declines of some species of salmon on our major rivers like the Yukon and Kuskokwim, Kings, Chum, while in other parts of the state, out in Bristol Bay, for example, with sockeye salmon, we've seen epic, historic runs. So you might remember last year at AFN, I talked about my legislation, the Alaska Salmon Task Force Research Act, that was all about focusing on trying to get to the bottom of what is happening. Why are we having these horrendously difficult, major declines in the runs of our salmon in many parts of Alaska? Well, the good news is that bill was signed into law at the end of last year, and we are now implementing that. Many of you are part of the Salmon Task Force Act, both the working group that is primarily focused on Alaska Natives from the Kuskokwim and Yukon and interior regions, but also from other parts of the state. The goal of this legislation, which we are now implementing, is to bring the best minds, Alaska Natives, the state, federal officials, university officials, traditional knowledge, the best minds in Alaska, literally the best minds in the world, to figure out what is happening with these salmon runs. These huge declines are unacceptable. We need to get to the bottom of this in terms of the best minds, the best science, the best data. So I want to thank so many of you who are already part of the implementation of our bill. We are going to find out what's happening. We're going to try, and then, of course, take action on that. We're working on some other issues that are focused on our fisheries. I know many of you have been concerned about the unfair trading with the Russian salmon flooding world markets, which has crashed the price of salmon and other species around the world, hurting our fishing communities throughout the state of Alaska. We're working on a farm bill provision that enables fishermen and fishing communities in our state to have the same benefits that farmers do, to lower the risks of fishing. So there's a lot that we're doing on fisheries, and I know that so many of you are focused on that, particularly on subsistence fishing, and I can guarantee you, myself and my office are 100% focused on these big challenges. Let me give you another area that I know is a big one that we had some good progress on this past August, and that's housing. Safe, affordable housing. It's a crisis, I think, throughout the whole state, whether you're in Anchorage or Fairbanks or in some of the most remote communities in our state where housing is so expensive for everybody. Some of you know I hosted the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Fudge, this August, and we did a big roundtable. A number of you attended, so thank you. A number of you traveled hundreds of miles to come to this roundtable in Anchorage. It was fully focused on the high costs of housing in rural Alaska, in your communities. So we had, she got an earful, I will tell you that, from so many folks, because as you know, HUD and Nahasda Housing, to build a duplex in some of our rural communities can cost up to $1 million. No kidding, $1 million. Crazy. So one of the things that we did get out of that summit with the Secretary of HUD is to work with us to create a task force on why there is so much red tape from the federal government that makes our housing costs in rural Alaska so very expensive. So stay tuned on that. The Housing and Urban Development Secretariat is going to be announcing this task force soon. But I will tell you, we also saw some great examples of innovative housing that was taking place, building of housing in different communities. Huslia, Hughes, some of the leaders there are tribal leaders, the community leaders are doing incredible work, bringing good, affordable, beautiful housing at much more competitive costs than the HASDA and HUD do. So we have some great example of how it's actually working. Let me just end by mentioning a couple things. And first, it's this issue of the importance of unity. Last year in my AFN speech, I spoke a lot about the importance of unity. When we speak with one voice, we can get really big things done for our state. It's not always easy to speak with one voice, we know that. But on some really important issues, I think we can do it. Let me give you a couple examples where we are doing it. Some of you I know attended the summit that I hosted last August on broadband connectivity, internet connectivity, with the goal to get every community in our state, the most remote rural communities, broadband and internet connectivity. Think about what we can do as a state in terms of education, healthcare, small businesses if we achieve that goal. We're starting on a good path to achieve that goal. Some of you might know in the infrastructure bill that passed a couple of years ago, I fought for a formula that prioritized communities that had nothing. That's where the federal government should prioritize its resources for broadband deployment. Now, some of my colleagues in the Senate were saying, no, we want to go from 4G to 5G. In our communities, that's where we should be putting the money to, 4G to 5G. I was saying, what about no G, right? There's so many communities in Alaska that don't have anything. Fortunately, we won that battle, and you're starting to see hundreds of millions of dollars coming to our state in terms of broadband connectivity in rural communities. It's happening all over the state. We'll continue to press it. The money needs to be well spent, not duplicated, of course, spent according to the rules, but it's a great opportunity for us. The other thing that I mentioned last year where we needed to come together in AFN has done a great job, and so many of you were part of it, was getting the federal government to approve the Willow project. We got that done. I think it's going to be a really important project for our state, for our communities, for jobs, for resources. And here's one reason why I think resource development, responsible resource development for Alaska is so important, and it's why I and so many of you are so passionate about this. I have a chart that I want to show you that I frequently trot out in speeches and in hearings. This is a chart from the American Medical Association that shows the change in life expectancy in America from 1980 to 2014. So a 25-year period. And if you look at it, the state that does the best in the country in terms of life expectancy is ours. If you see this chart, the dark blue and the purple shows those are life expectancy increases up to 13 years. Now, that's great news for Alaska. Why did that happen? Well, to be honest, we started at a low level. Many of these areas that have a dramatic increase in life expectancy are in our rural areas, where unfortunately our life expectancy in rural Alaska was quite low. Then what happened? Responsible resource development happened on the North Slope, in the Northwest Arctic Borough, out on the Aleutian Island chain with the fishing opportunities there. And you saw this great surge in life expectancy in our state because people got jobs and revenues and clinics and gymnasiums and schools, things that people in the lower 48 take for granted. So as I tell my colleagues, I don't think there's a policy indicator of success. More important are the people you representing living longer. That is happening in our great state, We need to continue that trend, and that's why resource development is so important. Finally, in terms of unity and being able to lift up our voices, there's going to be a lot of federal officials, as you know, always are at AFN. And I think, we should make sure that the federal government officials hear our voices. One that I'd like you to specifically request respectfully your help with is on an issue I know you care deeply about, and that's the Vietnam veteran land allotment. This was my legislation for our brave, patriotic Vietnam veterans, Alaska Native Vietnam veterans, who were not able to get their allotment because they were serving in the military when, let's face it, many Americans were avoiding service and they got home and they missed the opportunity to apply for their allotment. We fixed that in legislation, but the implementation of this has been very poor. And I've talked to the Secretary of Interior, who will be at AFN a number of times, recently sat down with the director of BLM and said, you've allotted now 14 plots of land out of an estimated 2,500. 14 in 3 years. With respect, that is a failure. It should be 14 per day, not 14 in 3 years. So if you see the secretary, please reinforce what I'm saying. We need to get these allotments to these great Vietnam veterans, Alaska Native Vietnam veterans. 14 total is unacceptable. And that's what I've been telling her. And if you can deliver that message as well, that would be great. And finally, we always need to make sure every federal official knows that they have to conduct consultation with Alaska Native groups and Alaska Native organizations. For far too many big issues, particularly some of the resource development issues, they're not doing any consultation. That's also unacceptable. So, thank you again. I know you're going to have a great AFN. There's so much power and goodness in this room. There's so much unity. And when we're all working together, it's amazing, unlimited in my view, on the amount of things that we can get done for our Native communities, for our state, and for our country. Have a great conference.